Joining me live in the studio is former Israel Defence Force spokesperson Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, great to see you in person. It happens on a day where we're at 500 days since October 7. What is your hope from here? What does the end of this war look like? What does peace look like?
Yeah, thanks for having me in studio. First time. I think peace is a very big word to be dreaming and thinking about at this stage. Mm-hmm. It's obviously always where we go to. When Israelis greet each other, we say shalom, and that means peace. So we yearn for peace. We have proposed peace many times. It has been elusive and not yet attainable with our Palestinian neighbors. At this stage, I think we're sadly still very much in the woods, and we are fighting. The fighting isn't over. I think that solving the situation in Gaza will take months and years to come. I know that many in Australia want this to be over with. There's, a desire for this to be done already. Many in Israel want this to be done, but sadly, as long as Hamas exists as an organization, as sovereign power in Gaza, it won't be done. It will be delayed and will be kicking the can down the road. So there's still a long way to go in Gaza. And positively speaking, I think that if we zoom out and look at the Middle East, I can say that Israel is probably in a better situation today than it was on October the 7th when it comes to big picture, vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran against Hezbollah and the situation in Syria. Gaza is still very dynamic and challenging. There's lots of suffering there that we need to sort out. But big picture, I am hopeful about the future in the region.
Trump's intervention is obviously a big one. Many think
Indeed.
His plan to make Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East is not going to happen. Do you take him literally or seriously in this point? And even if you don't take him literally, if he can't achieve, what many believe is a pipe dream and unserious, does that, spur on something a little bit more ambitious, if you like?
I think what President Trump has already done is to shift the frame and to force the other side, Arabs, Palestinian supporters and enemies of Israel, to understand that reality has changed and the goalposts are now different. And now the ball is in the Arab court. They are scrambling now to try to come up with some kind of solution to counter Trump's general vision. I know that it's a big thing to kind of digest, to move Gazans out, but if you think of it, it's not that revolutionary. We've had, in the region, we've had so many wars, and Gaza has been a problem for so many years. It's been under terrible rule. It would make sense to have Gazans do what people around the world have done in all wars. When there's war, people are allowed to flee. That's what happened in Ukraine. That's what happened in Afghanistan. That's what happened in Syria. That is what happens in war. People flee. The only ones who haven't been allowed to flee are the poor Palestinians who have been kept in by the Egyptians and by international pressure that forces them to stay in a place which is a very bad place for them. Now, I understand and respect that people have other aspirations that might be against my aspirations. I understand that. But bottom line, they have to face the consequences of launching a war against Israel. When you launch a war, you basically throw the dice and you make a gamble. If you win, you take the spoils. If you lose, you face consequences. And in human history, that has been about losing terrain and losing assets. And what President Trump has done is brought back that reality and said to Gazans, to Palestinians, you made that bet and you lost, and here are the consequences. And it's going to be a very interesting week. Coming days, Arabs will come forward with what probably is a proposition. The president of Egypt will travel to Washington to meet with the president, and we'll see where it goes from here. But really, I would say dramatic moments in the Middle East that'll be crucial for the future. We can be hopeful that we can find some kind of positive way out, or continued suffering and misery like we've had in Gaza for so many years.
The ripple effect is one that has reached Australia as well. A huge community of Jewish Australians. There has been a wave of anti-Semitism since October 7 that has been steadily climbing. What has been the feedback to you in Australia since you got here, and is this something that is, that you're aware of even in Israel? Yeah.
You know, something absurd, right? I come to Australia for the first time. I see the beautiful country you have here. Everything's clean, everything works, people are friendly and out doing sports every hour of the day. And it's really heaven on earth when you look at it from a Middle Eastern perspective. Yet you have people in Israel calling their Jewish relatives in Australia and asking if they're okay. Israel is at war and we are surrounded and we're fighting on 6 or 7 fronts, and Israelis are calling Australians asking if they're okay because they see what's been allowed to happen on Australian streets, with synagogues being burned and bombed and people being harassed and Palestinians raging in streets and occupying campuses and whatnot. And that's of course absurd. I think the situation is something that really should change. And never mind the Jews, okay? It's not about the Jews. I think that history teaches anybody that wants to listen that it only starts with the Jews, right? Bad things in societies, they happen. Jews in history have been targeted first, but it never stops there. It goes on to other people. And I think that Australians across the board, with no bearing on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but just out of an interest of self-preservation, of preserving the beautiful thing called Australia, a system that works so well, a very tolerant society. You want to preserve that, you have to make sure that people's liberties are respected and that everybody feels safe. Jews today don't feel safe, and Jews in Australia are loyal, proud, patriotic Australians. They pay their taxes, they do their share for Australian society. Many have served in the military, and I think they should be respected as such and not be singled out and be afraid to wear a Star of David or a hostage pin or to go to synagogue.
My next question was going to be about what your advice would be to your Jewish brethren here in Australia, but given your answer just then, what is your advice to all of us?
Stand strong. Stand strong. You in Australia have so much to defend, so much to enjoy. Australia is a beautiful success story. Jews in Australia are a beautiful success story, and as such, they have a lot to lose and they should defend it. And I think there's a bright future ahead in Australia, for Australia as a country and for Jews in Australia. I would not like to see it lost just because of weak politicians who are caving into populist demands and external incitement and support of terrorism, and, guised as woke or progressive agendas. That's not real. And I think that each politician should ask him or herself before they go to sleep, what do I really stand for? Do I stand for democracy? Do I stand for civilians? Do I stand for law and order? Or do I stand for just getting re-elected the next vote because my constituents may be Muslims or supportive of Palestinians?
When you talk about weak politicians, are you speaking about the government and how we've either voted or not voted in the UN, whichever way we have, or is it the public statements that you don't think are strong enough?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think the most important thing I would say, and I say this respectfully, I'm not Australian, so I'm in my lane, but I would say that I think it is regretful when politicians don't uphold their obligations to all of the population, and when they cave in to pressure only from one side, and when law enforcement doesn't do its job. I mean, to see the kind of vandalism and bullying that I've seen on TV from Australia, parliament houses, Jewish places of worship, Jewish communities, to see that kind of violence in Australia against Jews. I mean, if you're a police officer, you shouldn't have to wait for orders and to tell a politician that you're supposed to go and arrest and take actions and protect civilians here. You're supposed to do the job. And what I have heard from so many Australian Jews is that, we've been left exposed.
Even if that's not true, that's the perception. Is that what you're saying? I mean, because, look, I don't think police officers are waiting for a directive from the Prime Minister. They're operating within the laws as they are.
At the Opera House and at many parliaments, whether it's in Melbourne or here in Sydney, right? You have...
Oh, you're talking about protests?
Yes, like illegal gatherings of people that are way beyond what is the norm and way beyond what's tolerated, and that are violent, chanting slogans of genocide and are openly anti-Semitic and promote terrorist organizations that the Australian government has defined as terrorist organizations.
We can have a longer conversation about this as well, but just because we're running out of time and I really want to get this out there today, with the protests, you're not saying, you need to ban protests per se. What is your concern? Exactly. Freedom of speech is important. These views have been aired, and it's not just a tiny subsection of the community now that has been proven a couple of times to us now. The more you do this and clamp down, it makes the Jewish community feel safer, but those views don't go away. Are you concerned that they're driven more underground, and that can be even more dangerous?
I think we're far from that point in Australia. I don't think that those views are driven underground. When I see the health workers in Sydney, that feels to me like the tip of an iceberg. When people are brazen enough and they feel comfortable enough to voice that kind of vile, hateful opinions, and they're being filmed, it means that they're not afraid. And it means to me that there's a whole system around it that supports that kind of thinking. And that is un-Australian. As someone who looks at Australia with admiration, Australian society, tolerance, rule of law, freedom, liberties, that is un-Australian behaviour.
Well, indeed, welcome to the best country, indeed the best city in the world, I might say, here in Sydney. Jonathan,
Thank you.
Really great to meet you in person.
Thank you.
See you
Likewise.
soon.
Thanks for having me.